This is the show dedicated to raising up the next generation of men of faith and character. My name is Mark Stanifer. Welcome to The Next Men Up,
part of the NRT Podcast Network.
Well, hey guys, welcome in once again to the Next Men Up podcast. So good, as always, to have you along with us for another episode. Well, as I've said the previous couple episodes and weeks, this third bonus episode that you are about to hear is really the story of Andrew Boscaljon's rite of passage ceremony that he did for his son, Dean. It's a fantastic story, and I love to capture these moments because they're so rare and so few in our experience. And I think it's a great way for you to see what another dad has done to inspire you and encourage you to take this on for your son and discover the sacred experience for him and for you and for all of those involved. Let me also suggest our own resource for helping you to create this rite of passage ceremony. You can find it at thenextmenup.com/forgingmen and take advantage of this course, this way to help you to design a customized process that's appropriate for you and your son and the journey that you want to take him on. Okay, that's enough. I hope you guys enjoy this bonus episode and Andrew's rite of passage story. Here goes. So one of the things that connected us was somebody that I had recently talked to on this show, Kurt Eldridge, had participated in an experience that you did for your son as part of a rite of passage. And I knew I wanted to talk to you, capture that as part of this this conversation that we had. So tell me a little bit about how old was he? What did you do? Like, take us through what this looks like, because most guys don't know what this means because we never received it from our dad. So take us through what you did, and we'll unpack it here for a few minutes.
Yeah, it sounds good. So, look, I had a middle of the night realization that it was time to do something for my son. It was just time. I felt the urgency of it. I felt the exactness of my son crossing from age 12 to 13. And honestly, I thought at first, he's too young. Even though I know, rite of passage, these kind of experiences historically, that's about the age. I still felt like when I put my head around it that he was too young, but at the same time, I felt the certainty that now's the time. So I started planning it. And, what did I do? I think right away, I felt the pressure of, do I have the integrity to take my son on a rite of passage? Right away, I was noticing that there was some self-work to do, even as I got ready, not to perfection, but that I knew I was going on some kind of passage with him.
That's right.
This wasn't just me doing something for him. Now, I did want him to experience some things. I wanted my son to have some kind of bookmark or touchstone in his life that he could look back to and resource. That he would have some memories and some experiences and some, tokens or artifacts, if you will, reminders of this moment in his life where his dad took him through a process of becoming a man. So those are the kind of the prominent feelings I had as I set out to design this rite of passage. And I didn't read any books or look at any kind of guidelines on designing this. I really stepped back and thought, what do I know? What have I experienced? What do I want to teach my son through this process? And then I built the choreography around that.
almost out of like what I'm hearing is like almost out of this intuition, like you tapped into something that was there and discovered maybe that you had the answer right there within you to draw from.
It was total intuition, and it was creative work. It was a lot of, I think this is something I want to do, and sitting with it for a while and just seeing how that came up to the surface and materialized into something tangible that I could do or be with him.
Yeah.
So I set up the choreography in parts. One part was what I called an immersion in wildlife. I wanted to get my son outside of the context of city and into nature.
Okay.
Into the wild, and the closest thing I could find to the wild. There was also an element around including eldership in this rite of passage, and I'll get to that in a little bit, but I wanted prominent men in my life to participate in this because these men were men who either built me up as father figures or friends and to help me become a better man, or had a direct relationship with my son and did the same. But either way, there was this, whether he knew them or not, there was this sort of family of brothers. And so I knew that this eldership piece really would have to include many different men, but certain men. And again, that had to surface. That took time. So there's this construct, right? And the third part was what I called tribal council, which was really the entrance of all men around a circle and doing some ceremony to finalize the rite of passage. And then after that, Mark, we feasted. There was a dinner table ritual. And it was all about men at the table, culture of honor. So I'll go through each one of these a little bit. So the immersion and wildlife piece, there were different parts of that, but the way it started was actually weeks ahead, where I spoke with my son and I gave him a script, almost an inquiry. And the inquiry was specific for him. I prayed about it, and it was a question that didn't need to be answered. And the days that followed, I checked in with him just to see if he retained it and if he was thinking about it, and he was. But I gave him a script, and then as the day came along and we were entering into the wild, we did what's called a medicine walk. We didn't talk. We just walked. We took in nature. We talked about the things that we saw, and it was more poetic than anything else. It was more about, look at that, those colors, this feeling. They were observations. But what I wanted to show my son was the world of wild and what it would be like to sit back and notice things with a new lens, a different eye than what we're typically using on our day-to-day. At a certain point, I brought him to a threshold, and we actually built a threshold out of rock. And I said a prayer for him and over him. And the goal of the threshold was to show him that there is a transition from natural into spiritual. And I shifted the leadership around his events in the wild following that threshold to more of a spiritual dynamic. Less observation, more instruction. There were some lessons that I wanted to teach my son. And the men listening to this will probably have lessons that are very important to them that they would want to teach their son. For me, it was this metaphor of cutting wood in spiritual life and the work it takes, the toil it takes before you have a fire. And so I wanted to talk about that slow process of growing in virtue and growing in prayer life, right? Before the fire even came to us. That was one thing that I did. We also worked on a medicine wheel out in the woods. And on the wheel, I spent time talking about my life. And if you're not familiar with the wheel, it signifies different stages in life. And so I walked physically around the wheel, zigzag, not just circular, and talked about different stories. What happened when me and his mom got divorced? How did I feel, and where was I at on the wheel situationally? How was my maturity level? What lessons was I learning? And then, of course, as those stories came to an end, I ended in the fire, in the center where God's at. And it was really cool then to see him tell his story on the wheel. And to witness that and participate in his story. And he really took that on. I was actually quite surprised. We did a medicine bag, so we collected different things from the woods around us to memorialize our event together. And then we crossed back over the threshold. Now, the crossing back over was pretty cool because waiting for him were a line of elders along a trail in the woods. And ahead of time, I asked the elders, these men in my life, I asked them to consider the inquiry, what does it mean to be a man? And they had months to prepare. They had homework to do too. They had to write down their message, and they had to prepare some sort of artifact for my son. And so as my son went from man to man in age order, from youngest to oldest, he was experiencing the maturity of the man and the message, and he was memorializing it in an artifact and collecting them as he went. I needed him to have some kind of token he'd go back to in his life.
Yep.
To remember the face, the place. As the men finished with my son, then they went down the path and they saw the older men as they exited. So the work of this, what I'd like to underline is that the work of this choreography is very much, it's collective, right? It's my work getting there and getting ready to take my son on a rite of passage. It was their work answering a very tough inquiry for them and preparing that message. And then it was Dean's work, right? Entering into his manhood. And so through that path of elders, they answered the question, they gave him something to anchor the message. And then they met at the tribal council. In the tribal council, I had prepared a fireplace area with stones and things to sit on. And the men sat in age order around the fire. And I told a story. I told a medicine story. It wasn't a story out of the Bible. It was a story about becoming a man. It was folklore. The goal of the story was to meet each man at the fire with his own question of manhood. It was to connect with every man. And that's the goal of a medicine story, that you tell a story, at some point you stop listening. And that's usually the point that you needed to hear the most. And you hang out there for a bit. So I told the medicine story, and then we did what's called a talking stick ritual. And we passed the stick around the fire. Now, it was my son to my right. I was the youngest man among the elders, and all of my friends around the fire. And we took turns speaking with the stick. The goal of that was to underline the life of God in each one of us and the power of our voice and our message, and to give each man an uninterrupted moment to speak. And so we went around the circle and each man spoke from his heart about whatever he wanted to speak to. And then my son spoke last. Then we went to dinner. And that was it. That was the choreography.
So cool, dude. Obviously, I can hear the American Indian influence coming through in how you put this together. And I think it's also evidence that you can take an ancient tradition and still customize it to you and your situation and your son and his situation. And there are themes and elements that you can draw from for sure, but it can be customized. And I can also hear some, or I can feel intimidated by the idea of pulling something off like that, right? Like you put a lot of thought into it because that's who you are and that's what you wanted to accomplish. And, you know, we've talked about this on this show. How do you give what you never got? Well, you just figure it out. We as guys figure it out all the time. We just spent an hour talking about the theme of active versus passive. You figure it out and you pursue progress over perfection. So, guys, as you're listening, don't be intimidated by what Andrew described. Be invited and inspired by the opportunity to do something like this with your boy.
Yeah, you know what I did is I thought of what are the formative things that have happened in my life.
Yes.
Where I had an experience, and I made a list and I connected it. Maybe it's at a football field or going to a special place for dinner. I hope that the men on this call can see how accessible this is, but it is co-created. It's something that comes from your belly.
Yep.
You know, and you put it on paper and work from there.
Yeah, and I would be remiss if I didn't remind listeners that we've got a way for them to walk through a template or walk through a process to create something. It doesn't have to be from scratch. You can find this on our website, thenextmanup.com/forgingmen is where you can get some information there. Andrew, the last question that I want to ask you is, on the backside of this experience, what changes for Dean and what changes for you?
You know, I asked Dean how the rite of passage impacted him. And my son said, Dad, I'm just so grateful. And he repeated it. I just feel so grateful. I didn't know how much I was cared for. You know, we think about all of that work as a father to really think about how do I give my son everything I can give at this age, and that's the outcome. That's a successful mission right there.
Yeah, man.
I feel so good about the fact that my son feels loved. So that's a game changer, let me tell you, because things that were hard before aren't so hard anymore. You know, where we have conversations around how's he acting in the home, or things that are going on with friends or school, or circumstances where maybe before he felt there was a barrier, the barrier's smaller now. You know, and I would say there's more intimacy now between me and my son, and that was the goal.
Dude, that's fantastic. Again, thank you for giving us some insight into your story, for sharing that, and props to you for figuring it out, because we didn't get this from our dads, right? You've given to Dean something that you desperately were longing for, that affirmation, that validation, that confidence that he was cared for out of your own void, right? Out of your own experience of not receiving that from your dad. I would be shocked if there's any men listening to this that received something like what you described from their dads. And so we're just figuring it out. It's left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. So props to you for figuring it out, and for making an impact in that boy becoming a man, his life that will forever be there, man. Well done. Well done.
And props to all my teachers along the way, and all the men that spoke into me. gave me those formative moments and taught me and really showed me the way. Props to those men. Props to my father for everything he taught me. You know, I'm so grateful.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful. I didn't do it alone.
Yep. So good, man. So good. Hey, listeners, thanks for journeying with us on this Next Man Up podcast. You know, we would love to hear from you. Maybe you have a question or an idea, perhaps a topic for us to consider. If that's you and you want to reach out to us, you can get us at feedback@thenextmanup.com. That's feedback@thenextmanup.com. Again, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, we'll see you later.